Behind these ancient walls lies the smallest country on earth, yet it holds some of history's greatest secrets. For nearly 2,000 years, the Vatican has been the spiritual heart of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. But beneath its sacred facade lie vaults filled with forbidden texts, legendary artifacts, and mysteries that have captivated scholars, conspiracy theorists, and historians for centuries. Welcome to our journey into the hidden world of Vatican City. Over the next 2 hours, we'll explore the secret archives, investigate legendary artifacts, examine controversial events, and uncover the truth behind some of the most persistent mysteries surrounding the Holy See. This is not a story of faith or religion, but of history, power, and the human desire to protect knowledge. Some secrets were kept to preserve the Church. Others were buried to protect it. And some remain locked away for reasons we can only imagine. Let's begin our evening exploration of these ancient mysteries, wandering through shadowed corridors and dusty archives, discovering stories that have been whispered for centuries. Chapter 1: The Secret Archives. The Apostolic Archives Unveiled. For centuries, they were known as the Archivum Secretum Vaticanum, the Vatican Secret Archives. In 2019, Pope Francis renamed them the Vatican Apostolic Archives, but the change in name hasn't diminished their mystique. These archives contain over 53 miles of shelving, holding documents that span 12 centuries of history. The word secret originally meant private, in Latin secretum, but that hasn't stopped speculation about what might be hidden within. Access is strictly controlled. Researchers must apply months in advance, can only request 3 items per day, and documents less than 75 years old remain closed to the public. But what's actually in there? Among the confirmed holdings are letters from Michelangelo complaining about not being paid for the Sistine Chapel. There's the 1521 document excommunicating Martin Luther, starting the Protestant Reformation. A letter from Abraham Lincoln sits alongside medieval manuscripts. There are transcripts from the trial of the Knights Templar, those mysterious warrior monks accused of heresy. Correspondence with Genghis Khan rests in these archives, as do letters from Mary Queen of Scots, written shortly before her execution, pleading for her life. But it's what we don't know about that fuels endless fascination. Scholars and researchers who've gained access describe a labyrinthine collection so vast that no single person could explore it in multiple lifetimes. The catalog itself is incomplete. Some sections remain unindexed, their contents unknown even to the archivists who walk those quiet halls each day. Imagine walking through these corridors. The air is cool and dry, perfect for preserving ancient parchment. Your footsteps echo softly on stone floors worn smooth by centuries of scholars and priests. Wooden shelves stretch up toward vaulted ceilings, disappearing into shadows. Each box, each bundle of papers tied with ribbon, contains someone's story. A pope's private thoughts. A king's desperate plea. A heretic's final words. What might be hidden? 10 to 1800 hours. So what are the theories about what might be hidden here? The early Christian church was far more diverse than many realize. Dozens of Gospels and texts circulated in the first few centuries after Christ's death. The canonical 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were selected by church councils, but what happened to the others? Could the Vatican possess copies of the Gospel of Thomas beyond the fragments we know? What about texts from the Gnostic traditions suppressed by early church fathers? Some researchers believe complete versions of these alternative scriptures might rest in the archives, deemed too heretical or confusing for public knowledge. These lost Gospels told different stories about Jesus. Some portrayed him as more human, others as more divine. Some included sayings and parables that didn't make it into the accepted versions. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Philip, each offered a different perspective on early Christianity. Most were destroyed or lost. But in an archive as vast as the Vatican's, who knows what might survive? Throughout history, the papacy has had its share of controversial figures. Pope Alexander VI of Borgia was known for his political machinations and personal scandals. He fathered several children, engaged in nepotism, and turned the papacy into a political powerhouse. Pope John XII was accused of turning the papal palace into something resembling a brothel in the 10th century. These are the stories that made it into history books despite the Church's best efforts. Documents detailing the full extent of such activities, financial corruption, or political dealings could damage the Church's reputation even centuries later. Some believe the most damaging records were destroyed, fed to flames in secret ceremonies. Others think they're simply locked away in restricted sections, waiting for enough time to pass that they become historical curiosities rather than active embarrassments. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, the Church found itself at odds with emerging scientific discoveries. We know about Galileo's conflict with the Inquisition, but what about other scholars whose work was suppressed? Could there be confiscated works of natural philosophy, alchemy, or early astronomy that challenged Church doctrine? Reports from missionaries about lost civilizations they encountered might rest here. Evidence of historical events the Church preferred to keep quiet. Records of decisions made behind closed doors that shaped world history. Perhaps documents about the Church's actions during various wars and conflicts, showing the complex political maneuvering required to survive centuries of European power struggles. The reality of access. In recent decades, the Vatican has made efforts toward transparency. Pope Leo XIII opened portions of the archives to researchers in 1881. Pope Pius XI added more sections in 1939. Pope Francis opened files from Pope Pius XII's wartime papacy in 2020, finally allowing scholars to examine one of the most controversial periods in Vatican history. Scholars who've worked there describe a treasure trove of history, but nothing particularly scandalous in what they've seen. The real secret, they say, is simply the overwhelming volume of material and the challenge of preserving it all. Dr. Barbara Frail, an Italian paleographer, has spent years in the archives. In 2001, she discovered the Chinon parchment, which showed that Pope Clement V actually absolved the Knights Templar of heresy. This document had been misfiled for centuries, sitting in the wrong box, waiting for someone to stumble upon it. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what's being hidden, but what's simply been lost to time, waiting to be rediscovered by a curious researcher who requests the right box on the right day. Imagine the documents that might be discovered tomorrow, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now. Each could rewrite our understanding of history. The archives are only one piece of the puzzle. The Vatican also maintains collections of another kind, physical artifacts that have inspired equal measures of devotion and doubt. Chapter 2: Holy Relics and Artifacts. The Holy Lance. In a basilica in Rome, encased in one of the massive pillars supporting St. Peter's Dome, rests a fragment of metal that some believe pierced the side of Jesus Christ as he hung on the cross. This is the Holy Lance, also called the Spear of Destiny. According to the Gospel of John, a Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side to confirm his death. Early Christian tradition named this soldier Longinus, and claimed he converted to Christianity after witnessing Christ's death. Some stories say that Longinus was nearly blind, but when Christ's blood touched his eyes, his vision was restored. From that moment, he devoted his life to spreading the Christian message. The lance itself became one of Christianity's most sought-after relics. Emperors and kings sought it, believing it granted victory in battle and divine favor. Constantine the Great supposedly possessed it. Charlemagne carried it into 47 battles and attributed his success to its power. The problem is that at least 4 different holy lances have been claimed throughout history. One was carried by crusaders into battle in the Holy Land. Another is in Vienna, having been treasured by the Habsburg dynasty for centuries. This particular lance was even seized by Hitler in 1938 when Germany annexed Austria. Hitler, who believed in mystical and occult powers, thought the lance would grant him invincibility. He kept it in Nuremberg until American forces captured the city in 1945. A third lance is in Armenia, and the one in the Vatican has been there since the 15th century, a gift presented to Pope Innocent VIII by the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II. Scientific analysis has been limited, but what little has been done suggests the Vatican's lance dates to around the 7th century, not the 1st century when Christ died. Some argue it could have been a ceremonial cover for an earlier, original blade hidden inside. Others believe it's simply a medieval creation, crafted to inspire the faithful and give the Church a tangible connection to Christ's passion. But whether it touched Christ or not, the power of belief surrounding such relics is undeniable. For centuries, people have traveled thousands of miles for a glimpse, believing that proximity to such objects could heal the sick, protect the righteous, or grant spiritual favor. Pilgrims would kneel before the lance, praying for miracles, seeking connection with the divine through this ancient piece of metal. The chains of St. Peter. In the Church of San Pietro in Vincoli, St. Peter in chains, another relic, draws pilgrims. These are purported to be the actual chains that bound St. Peter when he was imprisoned in Jerusalem, and later in Rome before his martyrdom. Peter, the fisherman who became the first pope, was imprisoned twice. First in Jerusalem by King Herod Agrippa, as described in the Acts of the Apostles. According to that account, an angel freed Peter from those chains. Later, in Rome, Peter was imprisoned again during Nero's persecution of Christians. These were his final chains, worn during his last days before being led to his crucifixion. According to tradition, when the chains from Jerusalem were brought to Rome in the 5th century and placed next to Peter's Roman chains, they miraculously fused together. The links joined seamlessly, as if they had always been one chain. Whether this actually happened or represents symbolic unity doesn't diminish the chain's importance to believers. What makes this relic particularly interesting is its archaeological plausibility. Unlike many relics that emerged in the Middle Ages with questionable provenance, historical records mention these chains as early as the 4th century. Early pilgrims wrote about venerating them. The style and construction are consistent with Roman-era chains used for prisoners. Early Christians revered martyrdom sites and objects associated with martyrs. In an era of persecution, such relics provided connection to the apostles who gave their lives for the faith. The chains represent not just Peter's suffering, but the suffering of all early Christians under Roman rule. Each link bore witness to courage in the face of death. Modern scholars point out that verifying any relic's authenticity is nearly impossible without destructive testing that the Church would never permit. Carbon dating requires destroying part of the sample. DNA analysis is meaningless for metal objects. We're left with historical records, tradition, and faith. Still, pilgrims continue to visit these chains. They reach out, sometimes touching the glass that protects them, seeking connection across 2,000 years. Whether the chains are authentic or not, they represent something real, the sacrifice and suffering that built Christianity. The mysterious burial of St. Peter. But the greatest archaeological mystery involving St. Peter isn't the chains, it's whether his bones actually rest beneath St. Peter's Basilica, as claimed for nearly 2,000 years. According to tradition, Peter was crucified upside down in Nero's circus around 64 AD. He requested this inverted crucifixion, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as Christ. His followers, risking their own lives, took his body from the execution ground and buried him in a nearby cemetery on Vatican Hill. When Constantine legalized Christianity in the 4th century, he chose to build the first St. Peter's Basilica directly over the supposed burial site, despite the enormous engineering challenges. The hill was unstable, requiring massive retaining walls and fill. It would have been much easier to build elsewhere, but Constantine insisted on this spot. Why go to such trouble unless something truly important was buried there? For centuries, this remained tradition and faith. Then, in the 1940s, Pope Pius XII authorized excavations beneath the basilica. Workers began carefully digging through layers of history, moving through the Renaissance church, past the medieval foundations, down to Constantine's original basilica, and finally beneath that into the ancient world. What they found was extraordinary. Beneath the church lay an intact Roman necropolis, a city of the dead. Ornate tombs lined an ancient street, exactly as they would have in the 1st century. Wealthy Romans built elaborate mausoleums here, decorated with mosaics and frescoes that survived beneath the church for 2,000 years. And directly beneath the main altar, beneath the spot where popes have celebrated Mass for centuries, they found a humble grave marked with ancient graffiti. Scratched into the wall were words in Greek. "Peter is within." The bones of an elderly, robust man were found in this grave, dated to the 1st century. Missing were the feet bones, consistent with crucifixion, where victims' feet were typically left nailed to the cross. The bones showed signs of being hastily buried, wrapped in expensive purple cloth with gold threads woven through it, suggesting someone important. In 1968, Pope Paul VI announced these were Peter's relics. The church had found its founder. However, the archaeological evidence is disputed. Some scholars argue the bones could belong to anyone buried in that cemetery. The graffiti, while ancient, was added centuries after Peter's death, perhaps by early Christians marking what they believed was his grave. Carbon dating has been inconsistent, with some results suggesting 2nd or 3rd century dates, though others align with the 1st century. The debate continues among academics, but millions of pilgrims have visited what they believe is Peter's tomb. They stand in the grottos beneath St. Peter's Basilica, in a space that feels ancient and sacred, where the air is cool and still. They're standing where the fisherman who denied Christ 3 times, then spent the rest of his life spreading his message across the Roman world, finally rested. Relics raise fundamental questions. Do they need to be authentic to have power? Is there value in their historical reality, or in what they represent? And if the Vatican knows certain relics are not authentic, do they have an obligation to say so, or would that betray the faith of millions? These questions become even more complicated when we examine the Vatican's relationship with science and knowledge throughout history. Chapter 3: The Vatican and Forbidden Knowledge. Galileo and the Inquisition. In 1633, a 69-year-old man knelt before the Roman Inquisition. His crime? Teaching that the earth orbited the sun. His name was Galileo Galilei, and his trial represents one of history's most famous conflicts between science and religion. But the true story is more complex than the legend suggests. Galileo hadn't discovered heliocentrism. Copernicus had proposed it a century earlier in 1543. The Church had initially taken a cautious but not hostile stance toward the theory, treating it as a useful mathematical model for calculations. What changed was Galileo's insistence on claiming it as physical truth and his perceived challenge to scriptural authority. Galileo had built one of the first telescopes and turned it toward the heavens. What he saw revolutionized astronomy. He discovered 4 moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that not everything in the cosmos circled the Earth. He observed the phases of Venus, showing it orbited the Sun. He saw mountains on the moon, proving celestial bodies weren't perfect, unchanging spheres as ancient philosophy claimed. Galileo had support within the Church. Some Jesuits were accomplished astronomers who'd confirmed his telescopic observations. They looked through his telescope and saw the same moons, the same mountains, the same evidence. Pope Urban VIII was initially Galileo's friend. They'd had long conversations about astronomy and science. But the 30 Years' War was raging across Europe. The Reformation had split Christianity. The Church was in no mood for theological controversy that might suggest Scripture could be wrong about anything. When Galileo published his Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, which clearly favored the heliocentric model and seemed to mock those who disagreed, the Pope felt betrayed. Galileo was forced to recant, stating that he abjured, cursed, and detested his errors. According to legend, after his recantation, as he rose from his knees, he muttered, "Epres I move, and yet it moves." Whether he actually said this is doubtful, but it captures the spirit of scientific truth persisting despite institutional opposition. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest in his villa outside Florence. He continued his scientific work, writing about physics and mathematics, but was forbidden from teaching heliocentrism. He went blind in his final years, unable to see the stars he'd studied. His book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, remained on the Church's index of forbidden books until 1835, 200 years after his death. In 1992, 359 years later, Pope John Paul II formally acknowledged the Church's error, stating that the judges who condemned Galileo unduly transgressed the limits of their own competence. But the damage to the Church's reputation regarding science had long been done. The Index of Forbidden Books. From 1559 until 1966, the Catholic Church maintained the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Forbidden Books. At its peak, it listed thousands of titles deemed heretical, immoral, or dangerous to faith. The list included works you might expect: Protestant theological texts questioning Catholic doctrine, books challenging papal authority, works deemed obscene or immoral. But it also included some of history's greatest literature and philosophy. Victor Hugo's Les Miserables appeared on the index for its sympathetic portrayal of revolution and its criticism of the Church. All of Émile Zola's works were forbidden, including his famous defense of Alfred Dreyfus. Descartes' writings on philosophy were banned for suggesting reason could exist independent of revelation. Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, the great minds of the Enlightenment, all forbidden. John Milton's political works were banned, though curiously not Paradise Lost, his epic poem about Satan's fall. Perhaps the theological content protected it, or perhaps it simply slipped through. Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, was forbidden for its examination of the limits of human knowledge. Even some works by Catholic authors who'd stepped too far from orthodoxy found their way onto the index. The index reveals what the Church feared at different periods. In the 16th century, it was Protestant ideas threatening Catholic unity. In the 18th century, Enlightenment philosophy questioned all authority, including religious authority. In the 19th century, modernism and secular political thought challenged the Church's temporal power. In the 20th century, works on sexuality and birth control contradicted Church teaching. Possession of these books wasn't necessarily illegal, and enforcement varied greatly by region. In Italy and Spain, the Inquisition took the index seriously. In France, Germany, and England, it was often ignored. The index was more a statement of official disapproval than an effective censorship tool, especially after the invention of the printing press made books easier to distribute. Still, authors finding themselves on the index faced consequences. Their works couldn't be sold in Catholic bookstores. Catholic universities wouldn't teach from them. Faithful Catholics were told that reading these books was sinful, could lead to excommunication, and endangered their immortal souls. The index was finally abolished by Pope Paul VI in 1966, acknowledging that in the modern world, such censorship was impractical and often counterproductive. Forbidding books only made them more attractive. But it remains a reminder of an era when religious institutions attempted to control not just spiritual matters but intellectual inquiry itself. The Vatican Observatory and modern science. Today, the relationship between the Vatican and science has evolved dramatically. The Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical institutes in the world, operates telescopes in Arizona and employs Jesuit astronomers who've contributed to genuine scientific research. Vatican astronomers have discovered asteroids, studied distant galaxies, and contributed to our understanding of stellar evolution. They host conferences on astrobiology, the search for life beyond Earth. The Vatican has stated that belief in extraterrestrial life doesn't conflict with Catholic teaching. If life exists elsewhere in the universe, God created that too. In 1996, Pope John Paul II acknowledged evolutionary theory as more than a hypothesis, accepting the scientific evidence for human evolution while maintaining that the spiritual soul is a direct creation of God. Pope Francis has spoken positively about the Big Bang Theory and evolution, stating that God is not a magician with a magic wand. This doesn't mean all conflicts have disappeared. The Church still opposes certain scientific applications, human cloning, embryonic stem cell research, genetic modification for enhancement. But the opposition is ethical, not scientific, based on theological views about human dignity and the soul. The Vatican's relationship with knowledge has come full circle. Once it tried to control what people could learn. Now it engages with science, attempting to reconcile faith with discovery. Jesuit scientists work alongside secular colleagues, publishing in peer-reviewed journals, attending conferences, contributing to humanity's understanding of the cosmos. But this evolution raises questions about what other views might change with time, and what secrets from the past might embarrass the modern Church. Which brings us to more recent mysteries, events and controversies from the 20th century. Chapter 4: Modern Mysteries and Conspiracies. The death of Pope John Paul I. On September 28, 1978, a nun entered Pope John Paul I's bedroom to bring him morning coffee. She found him dead in bed, apparently having died during the night. He had been pope for just 33 days, one of the shortest reigns in papal history. The official cause was a heart attack, sudden and unexpected. The Pope had seemed healthy, though he did have some cardiovascular issues that weren't widely known. No autopsy was performed. The Vatican doesn't typically conduct autopsies on popes, considering their bodies sacred. Within hours, questions emerged. The Vatican's initial statements contained inconsistencies. First, they said he was found with reading material, documents he'd been reviewing. Then they said he was found with nothing. The timing of when he was discovered changed in different accounts. These contradictions, though possibly innocent confusion, fueled suspicion. John Paul I had been an unlikely pope. He was humble, soft-spoken, and uncomfortable with the grandeur of his position. He'd refused the traditional coronation ceremony, preferring a simple mass. He smiled frequently, earning the nickname, the Smiling Pope. He spoke plainly, avoiding the formal, distant language typical of papal communications. He'd also made comments suggesting he planned changes. He spoke about reforming Vatican finances. He mentioned reviewing the Vatican Bank and its operations. He expressed concern about priests and bishops living too luxuriously while their flocks suffered poverty. Author David Yallop's 1984 book, In God's Name, proposed a shocking theory. John Paul I was murdered because he planned to reform Vatican finances and remove corrupt officials, including those connected to illegal banking activities and potential organized crime ties. Yallop pointed to several suspicious elements. John Paul I had been investigating the Vatican Bank and its connections to Roberto Calvi, an Italian banker who was chairman of Banco Ambrosiano. The Pope had allegedly compiled a list of church officials to be removed for financial impropriety. These officials had motive to stop him. The conspiracy theory suggests that powerful figures within the Vatican had motive and opportunity. The lack of an autopsy, unusual even by Vatican standards, prevented any possibility of discovering poison or other foul play. The body was embalmed quickly, making later investigation impossible. However, the evidence for murder is circumstantial at best. Medical experts point out that heart attacks can strike anyone, even those who seem healthy. John Paul I had been under enormous stress, thrust suddenly into one of the world's most demanding positions. He wasn't sleeping well. The cardiovascular issues he'd kept private were real. The Vatican's inconsistent statements likely reflected confusion and poor communication rather than cover-up. In the chaos following a pope's sudden death, with dozens of officials each giving statements to different reporters, inconsistencies were inevitable. John Paul I's successor, John Paul II, did implement some financial reforms, suggesting that any supposed conspiracy didn't prevent the changes the first John Paul allegedly wanted. And if powerful forces could murder a pope, why allow reforms at all? Why not murder the second John Paul too? Most historians believe John Paul I died of natural causes, and that the conspiracy theories say more about distrust of the Vatican than about what actually happened. But the mystery persists because the questions were never fully answered, and an autopsy that could have settled matters was never performed. The Vatican Bank Scandals. Whether or not John Paul I was murdered, there's no question that the Vatican Bank, officially the Institute for the Works of Religion, was embroiled in genuine scandals during this period. In 1982, Italy's largest private bank, Banco Ambrosiano, collapsed with debts of over $1.4 billion. The Vatican Bank was its largest shareholder. Roberto Calvi, the bank's chairman, nicknamed God's Banker for his close Vatican ties, went missing. His body was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London, his pockets filled with stones and $15,000 in cash. Initially ruled a suicide, the death was later suspected to be murder by organized crime. Calvi had been laundering money for the Sicilian mafia and various political groups. He may have known too much about criminal connections to the Vatican. At the center of the controversy was Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, head of the Vatican Bank. Born in Chicago to Lithuanian immigrants, Marcinkus was more businessman than priest. He made his career in Vatican financial administration, rising to lead the bank in 1971. He was never charged with crimes but faced allegations of involvement in illegal financial activities. The Vatican invoked diplomatic immunity to protect him from Italian prosecutors. The scandal exposed how the Vatican Bank operated outside normal banking regulations. Its secrecy and lack of oversight made it attractive for money laundering. Connections to Italian politics, organized crime, and shadowy Masonic lodges like Propaganda do created a web of corruption that entangled the Holy See. The Vatican eventually paid $244 million to Banco Ambrosiano's creditors without admitting wrongdoing, essentially buying its way out of the scandal. Marcinkus returned to the United States, where he lived quietly until his death in 2006. He never gave a full account of what happened. It took decades, but reforms gradually came. Pope Benedict XVI initiated transparency measures. Pope Francis created financial oversight committees and began cooperating with international banking regulations. The Vatican Bank now publishes annual reports, undergoes external audits, and follows anti-money laundering protocols. Today, the Vatican Bank is far more transparent than in the 1980s. But its history serves as a reminder that the Church, like any institution handling money and power, is vulnerable to corruption. The Third Secret of Fatima. In 1917, 3 Portuguese children, shepherds in the small town of Fatima, reported that the Virgin Mary appeared to them, delivering 3 secrets about the future of the world. Lucia dos Santos, age 10, and her cousins Francisco and Jacinta Marto, ages 9 and 7, claimed the Virgin appeared to them on the 13th day of 6 consecutive months. The first secret was a vision of hell, a terrifying glimpse of souls in torment. The second predicted the end of World War I, the rise of Soviet communism, and World War II if humanity didn't turn from sin. These first 2 secrets were revealed relatively quickly and seemed to align with events as they unfolded. But the third secret remained sealed in the Vatican for decades, fueling speculation. What could be so terrible that the Church kept it hidden? Theories ranged from apocalyptic prophecies about nuclear war to revelations about church corruption. Some believed it predicted the assassination of a pope. Others thought it warned about the end of the Catholic Church itself, an apostasy that would see believers abandon their faith. The most dramatic theories suggested it revealed secrets about the end of the world, the return of Christ, or divine judgment on humanity. Pope John XI read it in 1960 and decided not to reveal it. Pope Paul VI read it and also kept it secret. This secrecy only intensified speculation. Leaked versions circulated, each more dire than the last. Some claimed to have insider knowledge of its true content. Finally, in 2000, Pope John Paul II authorized its release. The third secret described a vision, a bishop dressed in white, interpreted as the Pope, being killed by soldiers along with other Christians, amid a devastated city filled with corpses and crosses. The Vatican interpreted this as a prophecy of the 1981 assassination attempt on John Paul II by Mehmet Ali Agca in St. Peter's Square. The Pope survived, attributing his survival to the Virgin's protection. The bullet that struck him is now housed in the crown of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima in Portugal. Many found this explanation unsatisfying. Some believers in Fatima claimed the Vatican only revealed part of the secret. Conspiracy theorists insist the true prophecy predicted something far worse, perhaps the apostasy of church leadership, or a great schism that would divide Christianity. The truth likely lies somewhere between official explanation and conspiracy theory. The vision was probably more ambiguous than the official interpretation suggests, allowing for multiple readings. But the Vatican chose the interpretation that allowed it to close this chapter of speculation while reinforcing John Paul II's papal authority, and the idea that the Virgin protected him. Like many Vatican mysteries, the Third Secret of Fatima reveals how the Church manages information, carefully controlling narratives, revealing what serves its interests, and leaving room for faith to fill the gaps. Chapter 5: Secrets of the Modern Vatican. The Vatican today. Today's Vatican is a place of contradictions. It's the world's smallest country, just 121 acres, yet its influence spans the globe. It has no permanent residents by birth, only those who work there, yet over 1 billion Catholics look to it as their spiritual home. It maintains diplomatic relations with 183 countries, more than most nations, yet possesses no military beyond ceremonial Swiss Guards. The Vatican operates a sophisticated media apparatus. Vatican Radio broadcasts in dozens of languages. The Vatican Publishing House produces documents in Latin, Italian, and many other languages. Vatican News provides internet content reaching millions. The Pope's Twitter accounts have tens of millions of followers. This is an ancient institution that has thoroughly embraced modern communication. Beneath this public face, the Vatican remains a complex bureaucracy. The Roman Curia, the administrative arm of the Church, employs thousands. Cardinals head various congregations, councils, and offices managing everything from saint-making procedures to interfaith dialogue. The Secretariat of State functions as a foreign ministry. The Apostolic Penitentiary handles matters of conscience and pardons. Money flows through the Vatican from donations worldwide. Peter's Pence, an annual collection from Catholics, provides funding for papal charitable works. The Vatican's investments include real estate holdings in Rome and elsewhere, stock portfolios, and various business interests. The exact extent of Vatican wealth remains unclear, though it's certainly significant. The Vatican employs its own post office, issues its own stamps, mints its own euro coins, and maintains its own pharmacy. It has its own supermarket, available only to Vatican residents and employees, where goods are tax-free. There's a Vatican railway station, though it's rarely used. The Vatican even has its own football team, Clericus Cup, where seminarians compete. Secrets that remain. Despite increased transparency, the Vatican still holds secrets. The Apostolic Archives, while more accessible than ever, still restrict access to recent documents. Anything from the past 75 years remains closed. This means files from World War II and its immediate aftermath, from the Cold War's early years, from controversial decisions in the 1960s and 70s, all remain sealed. What might these documents contain? Correspondence about controversial political situations where the Church took sides or remained silent. Internal debates about doctrinal decisions. Reports from nuncios, papal ambassadors, about situations in their assigned countries. Financial records from periods of scandal. Personnel files about problematic clergy. The Vatican's diplomatic cables, like those of any nation, likely contain frank assessments of world leaders and political situations. Imagine papal nuncios writing honestly about the leaders they deal with, the political situations they navigate. Such candid communications, if revealed, could strain diplomatic relationships. Some argue the Vatican should accelerate access to these archives. Historians want to understand the Church's role in major 20th century events. Survivors of clergy abuse want to see files about how their cases were handled. Scholars of theology want to examine debates that shaped modern church teaching. Others argue that some secrets serve legitimate purposes. Diplomatic confidentiality allows honest communication. Privacy protections for individuals matter. Some revelations could genuinely harm innocent people or damage necessary institutional functions. The Vatican also holds physical objects whose full inventory isn't public. The Vatican museums display extraordinary collections, but what's in storage? Art too damaged to display? Artifacts of uncertain provenance? Objects deemed too controversial? Gifts from world leaders that wouldn't be appropriate to exhibit? The Vatican received gifts from fascist dictators, communist leaders, and countless others. Some are historically significant but problematic. The Vatican Library contains hundreds of thousands of manuscripts beyond those in the archives. Medieval illuminated texts, Renaissance scientific works, literary manuscripts from every era. Only a fraction have been digitized or fully catalogued. Researchers discover new treasures regularly, but many texts remain unexamined, their contents unknown. Perhaps most intriguingly, what oral traditions exist within the Vatican? Knowledge passed between popes, between senior officials, that never was written down. Understandings about how things really work, about past events, about agreements made in private. These secrets may die with those who hold them, lost to history forever.